Welcome to Fighting Stats, the ultimate channel for MMA fans who love statistics and betting breakdowns. I'm your host, Art C, and I'm here to get you ready for the upcoming UFC fights. In this series, I'll be watching tape and providing my real-time analysis on how I think the fights are going to go. I'll be watching for fighters' strengths, weaknesses, tendencies, and overall strategies, pairing that with Fighting Stats' exclusive UFC stats not available anywhere else to give you a prediction on how I think the fights are going to go and ultimately who's going to win. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Welcome to Fighting Stats. Welcome back to Fighting Stats. I'm your host, Art C, and today we are breaking down the UFC 297 fight between Chris the Action Man Curtis and Marc-Andre Barriault, the power bar. This fight will be at 185 pounds at UFC 297. Let's get this breaking down. So we watched all of the Marc-Andre Barriault side. We watched the Chris Curtis side. We're going to break it down based on the stats. First, we're going to go deep into the numbers here. So Chris Curtis, 4-2 in the UFC, 75% of his wins by KO, 0 by submission, has 25% by decision. All of his losses coming from decision, only 2 of them there, but both by decision. On the Barriault side, 5-5 in the UFC, 40% by KO, wins by KO, 20% wins by submission, and 40% of his wins by decision. Losses spread out as well, 20% by KO, 20% by submission, and 60% by decision. Both guys obviously pretty durable, most of them losing by decision there. Starting with Chris Curtis in the blue corner, offensively striking. We talked about him being mostly a boxer, standing in the pocket, really nice hands, good high guard there. So we see that at a distance, most of his strikes come from a distance, 90% of them coming from the distance, 7% from the clinch, and then a rare 3% on the ground there. Target breakdown, he does target the head at 75%, but he does like to go to the body. Very nice body work, right uppercuts to the body 20% of the time, and again 5% to the leg. Mostly a boxer, not really a kicker. However, in the last Nasruddin Imavov fight, we saw more heavy kicks from Chris Curtis, so maybe an adjustment there going forward. Striking accuracy to the head, 39%, not bad, 71% to the body, and 84% to the leg. Again, he just doesn't go to the leg too often. Average strikes thrown by a round. In round 1, he does look like a slow starter. 38 strikes thrown in round 1, 47 in round 2, and up to 75 in round 3. Somewhat of a slower starter. I believe he lost the first round to Rodolfo Vieira. He lost the first round to Joaquin Buckley. Same thing with Kelvin Gastelum, but then sort of comes back there. Defensively striking, honestly, very good defensive striking. We saw Chris Curtis likes to have that high guard up top. He moves about. A lot of shots get to the guard. When he does evade, he does like to dip to the left side. We saw that in the tape. We've got to be careful for those high kicks there. But generally, pretty good defensively striking. You can see most of the strikes absorbed have come from a distance, 95% of them at a distance, only 4% in the clinch, and 1% on the ground. Targeting the opponent's targeting Chris Curtis, 76% of the targets are to the head, 12% to the body, and 12% to the legs. In terms of defensive striking, 37% head defense striking, not bad, 69% to the body, and again 90% to the legs. Doesn't really check a lot of leg kicks. We saw that in the Hermansson fight and the Kelvin Gastelum fight. Not really. He ate a bunch of leg kicks there, not able to check a bunch of them. And then strikes absorbed by round 60, 62, and 66. Pretty high numbers there. It does sort of spike up there at the tail end. Looks to be more volume in rounds 3 there. Let's move on to the Barriault side here. On the red side, Marc-Andre Barriault, offensively striking 62%, 63%, distance striking 28% in the clinch, and 9% on the ground. Barriault does like the clinch, very good tie clinch where he holds onto the head of his opponent with his left hand and then throws a lot of right uppercuts, digging to the body as well. 84% of his target is towards the head, 11% to the body, and 5% to the leg. Similar to Curtis, not a huge leg kicker from Barriault. Striking accuracy, 40%, 42% head strike accuracy, 75% body accuracy, and 83% leg accuracy. Similar to Chris Curtis, his numbers start low in round 1 and then spike up in round 2 to 73 strikes thrown in round 2 and dips off at 65 in round 3 there. Does have knockdowns in rounds 1, 2, and 3. We won't go deep into the numbers. We have talked about those numbers there, but defensive striking from Barriault, 70% of the strikes absorbed against at a distance, 26 in the clinch. Not surprising as he likes the clinch. Some opponents do strike back in the clinch, only 4% on the ground there. Target against, 78% of strikes against landed are to the head, 17 to the body, and 5% to the leg. Similar defensive striking numbers, 37% of strikes towards the head land, 79 to the body, and similar 86 to the leg. Similar strikes absorbed by around 48 in round 1, 59 in round 2, and 48 in round 3 there. So distance numbers pretty similar in terms of the striking there. I'm going to briefly go over our detailed grappling report. We talked about how good Chris Curtis's takedown defense is. We're going to just quickly skim over Chris Curtis offensively grappling. He has not attempted a takedown in the UFC. I don't expect that to change against Barriault. He's going to want to keep this fight standing. I'm going to briefly go over the defensive grappling for Chris Curtis. 39 takedown attempts against, only 3 of them successful. Those 3 coming from Nasruddin Imavov in that last fight there. I think Imavov sort of caught Chris Curtis off guard, was able to transition to the back and then drag Chris Curtis down. Otherwise, he's shown elite takedown defense for most of his career. Again, Marc-Andre Barriault doesn't look to grapple. We'll go through those numbers there, but 39 takedowns against, 3 successful for Chris Curtis. Pretty good there. Does have 2 sub attempts. One against Imavov and one against later on against Brendan Allen. Marc-Andre Barriault grappling here, average takedowns by round, only throws 0.2 in round 1, 0.6 in round 2, and 0.1 in round 3. Really don't see Barriault attacking a takedown. Only 8 attempts in his UFC career. 2 have been successful. So based on the numbers, we can see that this fight is going to take place on the feet. All right. Red defensive grappling we don't have to go into because Chris Curtis is never going to throw or attempt a takedown. Let's go into the fight times here just based on the stats that we have. A lot of the time, Chris Curtis, we have the Nasruddin Imavov. Most of that fight was standing. 75% of that fight was standing on the feet, 3% in the clinch, 7% defending a takedown, and 15% was on the ground. Imavov was able to get the back there briefly. On the Andre Barriault side, similar numbers, 73% standing, 8% in the clinch. Couple of 4% attacking takedown, 10% defending the takedown, and only 5% on the ground. So again, most of this fight's going to take place on the feet. We move over to our fighting stats, striking tendencies matchups. See if you can find these stats anywhere else. You cannot. Looking at the Chris Curtis side, he does like the straight 2, so he's going to stand southpaw. 37% of the time he's going to throw that straight left. 25% of the time, again, this was against Imavov, he looked for the lower leg kick. 12% of the time he looked for that check right hook. 7% of the time he looked for a 3-1 combo, so right hook, right straight there. So on the Andre Barriault side, 25% of his strikes is a straight 2. He's going to stand orthodox, throw that straight 2. 1% is going to be that jab, and 19% is going to be that rear high kick. So both guys like to use that straight shot there. In the Southpaw versus Orthodox, you are going to see that left-hander, that 2, be a big factor in the matchup there. So we're going to go into how I think the fight's going to break down. So we saw Chris Curtis. We talked about him mainly being a boxer. He excels being in the pocket there. Again, he trains with Sean Strickland. Sean Strickland also somewhat of a boxer, standing upright. They spar every day, so that's going to be somewhat of the style that you're going to see from Chris Curtis, standing upright, again in southpaw, throwing a lot of hooks. He does like to dig the body. He did struggle with long, rangy fighters. Jack Hermanson fought the perfect game plan, staying on the outside, popping leg kicks, circling. Similar thing in the Kelvin Gastelum fight, and similar thing in the Imavov fight, where you could see Chris Curtis visibly upset and frustrated with the opponents running away from him. He'd like to sort of stand and trade in the pocket. Whereas On the Barriault side, he's not really a distance striker. Again, he doesn't throw a ton of leg kicks. Where Barriault really excels, I think, is more in the clinch. He likes the clinch. He likes to get in close there. I just don't know. I think Chris Curtis is pretty strong. You can see the back on him, very strong in the clinch. I haven't really seen anybody control him up against the fence. When he is on the fence, he usually pummels, being able to circle off and keep that range there. So that's going to be a big factor as who can implement their game plan. We've seen the blueprint sort of provided to how to beat Chris Curtis. I just don't know if Marc-Andre Barriault has the tools, again, to stay on the outside, pop leg kicks, and work that side. So, again, we talked about the takedown defense. We talked about the takedowns. It's not going to go to the ground, so I'm not even going to bother talking about if it does go to the ground. It's not going to go to the ground. It's going to stay standing. Chris Curtis, if it does stay standing, I do think that Chris Curtis is more technical. He's a better boxer, better shots to the body, very good straight left. I sort of prefer his cardio. We have seen Barriault get cracked by Chidi. He went down with the 1-2. Barriault does eat a lot of strikes over the top. So when he's standing orthodox, he will throw the jab. He does get countered over the top of his jab and eat a bunch of right hands there. Just Chris Curtis is going to be in southpaw, will not throw the left hand. It's going to be more of the left straight. Honestly, I'm just thinking it through it now. Chris Curtis, again, has the high guard there. He's not going to let a lot of straights come through. Chris Curtis, I do prefer his chin. He does take some big shots, has a decent chin on him as well, and decent power. So if it does stay striking, I do prefer Chris Curtis's boxing. I think defensively striking, Chris Curtis is pretty good defensively striking. I do think Chris Curtis has a good chin on him as well. Barriault is going to have to make this, if he's going to have success, he's going to have to make it a very dirty fight. He's going to have to come in close. He's going to have to sit in the pocket, throw these clinch, grab a hold of him, throw some uppercuts, strikes to the body, things like that. I just don't know. I think Chris Curtis has enough tools. I think he's strong enough to break off from the clinch. I don't think he's going to get controlled by Barriault there. Barriault does, again, his nickname is the power bar. He does come on in the later rounds. I think he's won a lot of his round threes. I'd have to go back and double check, but most of the round threes are Barriault rounds just because he does like to come forward and attack his opponent. Usually backing up. Just Chris Curtis doesn't do that. Chris Curtis will stand his ground. He'll stand there looking like Yoel Romero, high guard up there, sort of attacking it. He's more of a counter puncher. So I think, honestly, if I think about it, Barriault coming forward with the forward pressure actually favors Chris Curtis. That's the type of fight that Chris Curtis wants. He strikes with Sean Strickland all the time. Sean Strickland's always in his face, popping these jabs and stuff. Chris Curtis has some nice movement. Again, he dips to the left, but Marc-Andre Barriault doesn't throw a lot of right high kicks enough to sort of capitalize on that. Again, it's going to have to be in the clinch where Barriault wins. So I think I favor Chris Curtis here to win. I think he will win the stand-up battle. We're going to go into the numbers, see where exactly the numbers are. But that's, just talking it through now, that's where I think it's going to go. Let's bring up the numbers here. So, all right, well, I pulled up my handy-dandy bet tracker here. We put Chris Curtis on the blue side, Marc-Andre Barriault on the red side. So we always like to go through the different outcomes, put a number towards them, and see where we can find the best value on the prop line. So starting with Chris Curtis here to win by TKO, I definitely think it's possible. Chris Curtis does have some power in his hands. He has knocked out a couple of opponents. We have seen Marc-Andre Barriault get knocked out by Chidi there, so definitely possible on that side as well. I'm going to start it around 20%. I think it is possible. He does throw with power. I think it's likely there. Chris Curtis to win by submission. Now, I think it's possible. It's not 0%, but I just don't think it's likely. Chris Curtis not going to shoot for a takedown. Marc-Andre Barriault not going to shoot for the takedown. If Barriault shoots for a takedown, he probably doesn't get it anyway. So I don't think the submission comes. It's possible, if anything, it would come from like a club and sub. But again, we saw when Chris Curtis does get the knockdown, he favors ground and pound anyway. So I'm going to leave it at 0%. Don't want to sort of lose percentages to submission. And then Chris Curtis to win by submission. I definitely think that's more of his path to victory. Barriault, again, a pressure fighter. Could get knocked out, but I think it's mostly decision there. I'm going to put it at 40% for now. Let's go 40%. And see where else we land here. So Marc-Andre Barriault to win by TKO. I think it is possible as well, but I don't think it's as likely as Chris Curtis. He's going to have to get into the clinch there, throw some uppercuts in the clinch. Chris Curtis has a very good high guard where he keeps it up straight. Not like Barriault throws a lot of high kicks. Again, we talked about Chris Curtis dipping to the left side a lot. Barriault's not going to throw a lot of lead high kicks, the right high kick there. If he does go high, sorry, it's the right high kick there. So it's possible he throws the right high kick, but I don't think it lands. I don't think it knocks him out. Yeah, I think it's possible. We're going to leave it at 15%. It's probably a little bit lower there. To win by submission, I think if Chris Curtis is 0%, I'm also going to leave Barriault by submission at 0%. I just don't think there's any grappling, any ground time. So Barriault on the ground to win by decision. 1 in 3 fights sounds a little bit too high. Maybe 1 in 4. We'll leave that 25%. 1540. Okay, so that works. I'm trying to look at the numbers. Should the KO be a little bit higher? Okay, so we'll leave it from there. Maybe adjusted by 5% or so. But just to recap, Chris Curtis to win by KO, 20%. Curtis to win by submission, 0%. To win by decision, 40% for a total money line of 60% or minus 150 or better. On the Barriault side, 15% to win by TKO, 0% to win by submission, and 25% to win by decision for a total money line of 40% or plus 150. Yeah, I think for Barriault, actually, let's go into the not the decision. So no decision is 35% or plus 186. It goes to decision 65% minus 186 on that side. I do think it goes to decision more often than not. Unlike some of the other Canadian fighters, again, Barriault being the Canadian fighter, they sort of have to put him on the Canadian card anytime it comes to Canada. Chris Curtis, a sparring partner with Sean Strickland. Sean Strickland, obviously, the main event. So if Sean Strickland is fighting, it makes sense to bring Chris Curtis along. These guys are in the same weight class. This matchup makes sense on paper. So it's not like they're feeding Barriault a gimme fight. Makes sense for Chris Curtis, to be able to win that. So yeah, I think for Barriault to win, he's going to have to make it very dirty. I think it could go to split decision a couple of times. It really depends on how much volume Chris Curtis throws. I just think the type of fight that Barriault brings, that forward pressure, that forward aggression, really just plays into Chris Curtis's hands. He likes to be in there. He likes to throw the pocket in the pocket. He's going to go to the body often. It's going to zap some of the power away from Barriault. Obviously, I think that Barriault still will be there. It looks like a good live bet spot, if I'm being honest. I know Chris Curtis, we talked about his volume in round 1 being pretty low, him losing a couple of round 1s there and coming on in the later rounds. Just Barriault has a way of making it Barriault fights, and what I mean by that is just his forward pressure. Perhaps it's one of those things where Chris Curtis doesn't want to be completely in the pocket or in the clinch. So now it's, Chris Curtis moving backwards. We haven't seen a lot of that. Normally, Chris Curtis likes to hold his ground, strike there. But against a forward pressure guy, if Chris Curtis is trying to land and not get there, maybe he wants to keep the distance. So he's the one moving backwards. Maybe that backwards forward pressure gets to him and Barriault can win in rounds 2 and 3 sort of thing. But I think more often than not, it probably goes to decision. I do think that after round 1, you could probably get a better price on Barriault live. I think Chris Curtis is more likely to win round 1. I think it's going to be pretty evident early on what the game plan is for Barriault. If you do see him coming forward pressure, and sort of Curtis stands his ground, I prefer Chris Curtis to win that. If Barriault comes forward and able to clinch up and keep Curtis long in the clinch, I think Barriault can squeak out sort of a decision win. But most of the time, I think it's going to be Chris Curtis's fight. I tend to looking at the numbers here. I don't think 40%. I think 40% is a little bit too high. If I were to change the decision line to 20% and Chris Curtis to win by decision at 45%, actually I'm going to move up his KO line to 25%. I think it's possible there. So if we make that small adjustment by 5%, we get Chris Curtis on the money line at 65% or minus 186. Marc-Andre Barriault 35% or plus 186. I think that sounds about right. I think the lines are out there. Bringing up the lines here, I can't remember where the lines are at, so let me take a quick look. We're going to go down to UFC 297 here. Chris Curtis minus 160 so far. Marc-Andre Barriault plus 140. Let's see where it opened up. So it looked like Chris Curtis opened up at minus 160, dropped down to minus 180 right away. Looked like there was some early action on the Chris Curtis side. Then it popped up to 145, and looks like it's been bouncing between minus 145 and minus 160 or minus 170. So it probably ends somewhere around that range. I think it's similar to what our numbers have. Minus 160, we have minus 186. So very slight value on the Barriault side here. Sorry, actually on the Chris Curtis side, we said minus 160. Might have a little bit of, based on Kelly criterion, 8th Kelly criterion, 1.1 units at minus 160 is the best bet there. So keep an eye on that. I'm going to be looking at some props when they come out. I may end up playing the Chris Curtis money line side for somewhat small. I think Marc-Andre Barriault can make it a fight. Again, you have the crowd behind him cheering. I don't want to say hometown judging, but you do have to factor it in fights, especially that are likely to go to decision. Again, I have 60% likely to go to decision. You have to sort of keep it in mind. So you don't want to go too heavy on the Chris Curtis side when you know the judges are going to favor the crowd, hometown fighter, things like that. So just keep that in mind. I do think Chris Curtis is better a lot of the areas, striking wise, decent striking, defensive striking, zero grappling, so I don't need to comment on the grappling. The edge where Barriault has is going to be, again, the clinch and maybe the forward aggression, cardio into rounds 3. But again, maybe that's a Chris Curtis money line side, and then a small hedge on Barriault KO round 3 or Barriault to win by split decision. But otherwise, I think it's a Chris Curtis fight. We're going to see if we can get to the window. Make sure you subscribe to our fightengstats.com. Patreon.com/fightingstats, or you can go to our website, same thing, fightingstats.com. We have all the information there, but when we do make a play, we'll post it there. You'll have access to all these breakdowns as well, and the worksheets that we go through as well. So if anything changes and the odds populate, I'll populate those, and you'll have access to them through our Patreon site. Again, my name is Art C. Thanks for watching. This is Fighting Stats. Have a good day. All right, guys. Well, that is it for today. Thank you very much for watching. If you like this sort of content, make sure you smash the like button, hit the subscribe. You'll get notified anytime we put out new content. And remember, here at Fighting Stats, I lead a team of expert data scientists. We are working around the clock to produce these exclusive UFC stats, not available anywhere else. We do our tape study. We pair them with our stats. We put out our best bets. We put our best bets to patreon.com/fighting stats. That's where we put all our analysis, all of our stats. Join patreon.com/fighting stats to get exclusive access. Recently, we just hit $82,000. Yes, that's right. $82,000 parlay on one fight. We used our fighting stats to get there, and we won a massive payday. Our Patreon members had exclusive access to that, so they shared in the profits there. So don't miss out. Make sure you subscribe today. Again, my name is Art C. This is Fighting Stats. Thanks for watching.